Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. It's always a pleasure to come your way on this program, bringing you new paradigms for a new world. We are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Sundays at 7 a.m., 7 p.m., Mondays at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m. for that special edition of Tell Me Your Story. And then we're here Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m. Can you believe it? We have 9 different programs, 9 topics, 9 guests, 9 conversations. There's, I'm sure, something within numerology that probably speaks to the number 9 as rather significant. Maybe we'll have a numerologist on one of these days to talk about that. But be that as it may, all of those times that I mentioned, we stream live at those times at richarddugan.com. We are podcasting these programs in their entirety on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, as well as on YouTube, where you can watch these interviews. And we hope you'll subscribe, as well as select notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be able to tune in and listen. We hope that maybe you could also support us. You'd like to be a part of the work that we are doing. On a financial level, we would greatly appreciate that. We have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask to whom to send this support, you put in the email address richard@richarddugan.com. That's richard@richarddugan.com. We also ask that you spend some time during the decade of perfect vision, going within, listening to that still small voice. And with our subject today, sometimes that can be a little challenging, but our guest is going to help us to get through that challenge. Now, this program is going to be dealing primarily with, if I can put this in the proper context, 1/2 of the population. However, because we're all connected, it affects the entire population at some level in some way. And I cannot honestly say that I have experienced that effect, if you will, having grown up in a household with 5 women and 4 men, my father, mother, and 4 sisters and brother. Because, of course, we all moved on before this phase in a woman's life arrives. Well, today our guest, Dr. Soma Mandal, is going to share with us from the book that she has just released, Dear Menopause, I Do Not Fear You. A modern woman's guide to thriving through midlife. And thriving is what we are all about. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here on the program.
Thanks, Richard, for having me on your show.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. And of course, having, as I said, having 5 females and 5 inputs of estrogen, if you will, in a household as they were growing up. Of course, we all kind of went on our way when we hit our late teens or early 20s. And I don't really remember that period of time in regards to, say, my mother going through that process. I don't know that she necessarily tried to hide it, but maybe it didn't affect her in the way that it does most, I don't know if it's most women, but that's the other aspect of this. This is a phase in a woman's life in particular, but I have heard it said that men go through something like that. And I don't know, maybe they call that the midlife crisis. Got to go buy a Corvette and a boat and so on and so forth. So talk to us, first of all, about maybe, and we like to define terms. What is menopause?
The clinical definition, the true definition of menopause is 12 months without your menstrual cycle. It is a time when, there's obviously a hormonal changes, but preceding that, leading up to that, there are usually a whole series of hormonal imbalances that occur, within a woman's life. So there's like a phase that we go through. And the reason why I wrote the book is basically to educate women, not just about menopause, but also to let them know what they're at risk for. So your mom, for example, or whoever else is in the household, menopause can be associated with certain issues that puts us at risk. And then there are other things that people think that we're at risk for because of menopause, but we're not. So the book is basically a lighthearted way of addressing all these facts.
So we're not taking a super serious look at this. We're trying to keep it light because it's, for some women, it's hard enough as it is going through this phase. And you say 12 months, and it's typical. That's just the average. Some can be shorter, some can be longer, because everybody, we're all individuals.
No, the true definition of it is 12 months without your cycle. So let's say you're at month 11 and you get your cycle, you are still not menopausal and you have to start over from the beginning again.
Oh, rats. I'm sure
Yeah.
women are going, rats, doggone it. I thought I was going to be through this and moving on.
Yes. Yes.
I want to touch upon one area that I don't know many people think about in this context, because I would think, and I'm going to say this is a myth, that when a woman goes through this phase where she's had 12 months without a cycle, the libido goes away, or in some cases, it skyrockets. Talk to us a little bit about that, because again, as you just mentioned, this is a real shift and change in a woman's body chemistry.
A woman's libido can be quite complicated, but typically, as women go through this change, estrogen levels, progesterone, even testosterone can decline and cause issues with libido. That being said, I mentioned that libido can be a tricky thing for women because we often, visualize sex, view sex as an emotional thing. So sometimes it can be life getting in the way. It can be work. It can be, family. It can be stress, and that can impact a woman's libido as well.
Hmm. And as I said earlier, men, it is said, and again, I mean, I'm 64. Okay. So I have been through a process where, take it or leave it. It's not, and the problem is that from the man's standpoint, hey, this is just the process I'm going through. But if you have a partner, it's, well, why don't you love me? Why don't you want to be close to me? In other words, they take it personally. And it's like, it's not personal. I don't want anybody, that may come out as far as a man is concerned. Whereas I know, and again, if we if we dive in, and I wish I could remember the author's name who wrote "Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus," but again, we're different, and we have different wants, needs, and desires. Our body's chemistry is always changing as we age, regardless of what the age is, and it's really very interesting and perplexing for a lot of people. It can very frustrate to the extent, but there's something that I'm curious about. Does this process of menopause for women specifically, does this fall under the category of mental health and wellness, which, by the way, I applaud from this standpoint? The fact that we went through what we did from 2020 on as opening the door to the conversation about mental health and wellness. I think if you take nothing else away from of the experience that most of us lived through, at least now we're having that conversation. I often ask the listening audience, all right, everybody raise your hand who's in therapy. So does this fall under that category though?
Certainly, there can be elements of menopause where it can cause women to experience anxiety, irritation, depression, uh, whether they have an underlying issue or not, or, a lot of women start experiencing that. I wouldn't necessarily put menopause under the wing of mental health, though. It is a physiologic process, just like puberty and pregnancy, and, that we go through menopause. So it's a part of a life cycle, and a change that happens within our bodies.
Hmm. And this, and again, as we talk on this program, especially excuse me, from a metaphysical perspective, we're all connected. We affect one another. I mean, that just we do. We at the end of we just do. As Neil deGrasse Tyson has said, we're all made, and maybe it was actually Carl Sagan who said this, but we're all made of the same stuff, the same stardust, if you will. Even as the Bible says, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That's where we came from, and that's where we're going back to. And to that extent, from your experience working in this particular field, in this particular area, and of course writing this book, what are the pluses and the minuses, the pros and the cons of our current 21st century accessibility to all this information that's out there? And of course, Google is like, every time that comes up,
Yes.
I remember NetCrawl and a bunch of other search engines years ago, but Google
Yes.
is like your go-to to
Yeah.
find answers to, what's wrong with me? I have this symptom,
Yeah.
that, and the other, and so forth. And sometimes, based upon what you've put in, it'll give you that information. And now we have AI. I don't know how beneficial that's going to be. So what are the pros and cons of seeking out unassisted, shall we say, information, as opposed to going to a medical professional?
Right. A lot of my patients, they kind of have this like expression on their face, like, Dr. Mandel, no, you're not going to like this, but I looked it up on Dr. Google, and this is what I found. Like they're kind of admitting to their sins.
Mm-hmm.
But I get it. I get it. You get anxious in the moment and you want to look it up right away to kind of soothe yourself. But the problem with that is that you can often go down a rabbit hole and you find something that's not the case for you.
Mm-hmm.
So people will look up, why am I so tired? Right. And and it's almost like they're looking for whatever it is, like that bad thing is, and it'll say cancer. And I'm like, so I'm like, okay, yes, that can definitely happen. But there are probably 10, maybe even 15 other reasons why you're feeling tired that we should work up, right? That
Mm.
they haven't, looked into.
Yep.
So it
Go
can
ahead.
often lead people down a rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, and that's really because I still remember dating myself, but I've already said I'm 64. Uh, it used to be you'd have to go to the bookshelf and pull out your Britannica encyclopedia and try to look up what you were looking for. I was moderately successful at finding the things that I was looking for, but it wasn't necessarily on a medical level. But to me, it's just fascinating that we do have that availability. But I think that it is always important, and maybe they should put a disclaimer on all of the answers we get. But here's the information. However, please consult your medical professional, for more specific and accurate information. For example, I had a blood test, blood work done back in September of 2023. And apparently, several previous, the PSA, which has to do with the male prostate, was inching up and up and up and up and up and up. So this year, I had a biopsy done. Very interesting procedure. It was a whole lot of fun, and nothing. But my father had had prostate cancer in his 70s, had radiation treatment, gone, no problem. So I wasn't concerned if that is what it turned out to be. And of course, he lived to be 91. So, I didn't, I did sort of kind of go online to kind of look up some of these things and what is an elevated PSA really, what does it mean? Well, in this case, for me, for example, if it's not an indication that there's a cancerous material there, which there wasn't, according to the biopsies. I mean, unless they missed it and it's like on the backside of the prostate, then what the heck is it? What is causing the elevated? And I could not, even from my medical professionals, they could not give me a definitive answer. It's almost as if I was asking about, what does the appendix do? You know, And it's like still today, if I'm correct, we still don't know what the what the role of the appendix is. I just don't think they've done the research. Nonetheless, in terms of these different test results, the key, as you've already stated, is 12 months without a cycle for a woman. Okay. Are there any other signs along the way in that 12 months, or is that just seriously, that is the bottom line indicator?
That is the, like I mentioned, the clinical definition, but,
Okay.
like I said, there's usually stages, and that's where the variability can occur, where, women as early as their late 30s, up until their mid 50s can experience hormonal fluctuations, and that can cause symptoms like we mentioned fatigue as one of them, irritability, night sweats, hot flashes, headaches, palpitations, insomnia, and the list goes on and on.
Hmm. Now, it
Yes.
says here that you're a certified internist. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, I'm a board certified internist.
Okay. Does that make you an MD at this point, or are you still? Because my understanding of what an intern is that they're working their way up that ladder, going through medical school, and you have already helped thousands of women. Well, that didn't happen overnight. That
Yeah,
took, I'm
yes.
sure, years. So,
Yeah.
where are you in that regard?
Yeah, I've been practicing for 25 years now. So what you're referring to is your intern year, which is your first year
Yeah.
out of medical school, where you're doing your internship as part of your residency.
Hmm.
And for me, that was many, many moons ago.
So you've got the
So
MD behind your name now.
I do. I've had
Absolutely.
that for many years now.
Okay. And you're also, and I'm curious as to how the relevance of this aspect of being a fellow at Oxford University in England, which is a lovely country, right next to one of my favorites, Ireland. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I'm always curious about. I mean, I know a lot of people, and I've watched some people get their PhDs, for example, and
Hmm.
as they say, defend their dissertation, which I always thought was a strange way of putting it, but so be it. What does it mean to be a fellow, whether it's Oxford or any place else for that matter?
So that was a year that I spent studying at what English people call, or Britons call, you know, uh, uh, University of Oxford in England, and I spent a year studying evidence-based medicine.
Hmm.
And what that has helped me do is basically look at research and studies, and when things come out, and say, okay, this is a valid study, or these are valid findings because this is, what the research shows. So they basically taught me how to do that.
In your experience, as you have educated yourself and as well as started treating women in particular, you focus exclusively, if I'm understanding, on women's health. Um,
Mhm.
I know that there has been somewhat of an expansion of the statistics, if you will, regarding women's health. Whereas in decades, if not centuries gone by, all the statistics on human health and wellness has always been based upon the male anatomy, if you will. You know, are you seeing that the information that is now available? Here we are in the third decade of the 21st century. Are we? Has that expanded significantly so that we have more accurate information regarding women's health, that we're not using a lot of the old statistics and information?
Um, uh, so traditionally, or historically, a lot of research has focused on men, and unfortunately, that obviously doesn't benefit women because our bodies are different, the way we react to things are different. But there, has been a little bit more awareness and knowledge about this thing. I think we have a ways to go about focusing on women, in terms of scientific research, in terms of clinical trials, so that we have more data pertaining to heart disease, Alzheimer's, all sorts of stuff that, is more relevant to women.
So it's gotten better, but we still have a long way to go.
That's what I feel, yes.
You combined or fuse not only more Western Orthodox medicine with your Eastern roots. Talk to us a little bit about your roots and what you bring from your heritage, if you will, to women's health.
I think that's a great question. And I was born and brought up in the US, and I largely identify as being an American. And I trained at American schools. I went to NYU for college, med school residency. And so I've always thought of myself as a Western trained doctor. And it was a few years into practicing medicine when I encountered things like Ayurvedic medicine and acupuncture, where I noticed that it had it had its place in helping people, including myself. And prior to this, I actually didn't believe in that stuff. It was only when I started experiencing some injuries, and I had suffered a fracture, and I was having intense pain, and none of the Western medicines, so-called Western medicines, were helping. And I had some acupuncture, and that's when I realized, like, okay, there is definitely a role in Eastern traditions, in Eastern medicine, in terms of helping people with their health.
Well, I know enough, for example, about Chinese medicine in particular, and I suppose from a technical standpoint, that's Eastern medicine.
Yes, yes.
For 5,000 years, they didn't have an AMA. They didn't have a governing body. They just knew that it worked. And yet, here in the States, here in the West, it seems as though we have to go through so many hoops to justify that something works before we're quote unquote allowed to use it. What comes to mind what comes to mind is the use of various, well, I'll call them hallucinogens that are being used and or tested specifically on people who are suffering with PTSD, like our veterans. And it's helping. It's actually helping. And then there are people who will travel south of the border to, I guess Peru is one of the main places. Maybe it's, I can't think of the other country, but anyway, South America, where they will go for, I don't know, it's a week or what have you, and they will experience ayahuasca.
Mm-hmm.
And so on. And people have profound experiences. And again, it's a safe space that's created, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on, shall we call them some of the more fringe? Because I think that hallucinogens or psychedelics, if you will, might be on the fringe of alternative treatments. What are your thoughts in that regard? And it doesn't have to be exclusively the hallucinogens, but there are other modalities that people are using that are working for them as an individual. But if you brought it back to the States, you're going to be arrested, and so forth.
I don't know if I would necessarily say that they're on the fringe, although some are.
Mm-hmm.
But things like ketamine and psilocybin, have been used much more frequently, and I think it's governed state by state. From what I understand, certain states allow it, others, haven't yet. But they are gaining traction, and I do feel that it definitely plays a role in certain conditions. NYU did a huge trial on psilocybin and how it helps people with alcoholism and all sorts of stuff. So I definitely don't think, I wouldn't say it's on the fringe. I think there's much more.
Okay.
There's a growing awareness
Mm.
of these things at this time.
I know that from a philosophical standpoint, there are those who believe that we were created and that we were created and put here to subjugate the earth. And as I was driving in for this interview, the question came to mind: who does the earth belong to? Who does this planet belong to? And I know that many of those people of that philosophy would say, well, it belongs to us. No, it does not belong to us, because if it did, we would have made it. We would have created it. It belongs to who or whatever the creator is, as we talk about here on this program. And I love a line of an Irish singer, Mary Black, who says that you don't own the land. I don't care what piece of paper. Now, this isn't part of the song. What piece of paper you have, a deed, blah, 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 blah. You don't own the land. The land owns you. And what I find interesting, Soma, is that wasn't it in the beginning of shall we say, the pharmaceutical industry, and I'm talking the very early beginnings, where they found a plant, and I can't remember what it is, or a tree, where this was the initial or the origin of aspirin from a tree. And of course, now it's all synthetic, I'm pretty certain. And then there are all other forms of non-aspirin types of pain relievers and so forth. So our pharmaceutical cabinet, our medicine cabinet, used to be filled with all natural. And you'd actually go to a stereotype. Here's a stereotype for you. You'd go out into the woods, into the deep woods, where there was this small little hut where the old crone lived. She was an herbologist, and you'd tell her what ailed you, and she would mix it up with a mortar and pestle, and she would give it to you, and it would take care of whatever ailed you. Do you think that there is a lot of value in returning to what we would refer to as the old ways?
Most of our the medications we use are plant-based. They come from herbs and different plants. It's just, a highly chemicalized version of it,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously processed version of it. But there's definitely a role, of certain plants. I'm talking in its natural form,
Mm-hmm.
that can definitely be helpful for our health. And that includes, food as medicine. So, if you're eating, more vegetables, plant-based diet, it's of the same philosophy.
Dr. Soma Mandal is our guest. Her book, Dear Menopause, I Do Not Fear You. It's a modern woman's guide to thriving through midlife. And of course, we want everyone to thrive. It's enough of the survival. Okay, we've done the survival thing. Okay, let's move on and thrive in this life. This is a wonderful place to live, and we can make it better. There's always room for improvement, both outside of us, but also inside of us. What website would you have us go to find out more about not only the work that you are doing, but maybe I'm sure the book is available on Amazon, and I'm hoping maybe it's also available in Audible form. But how do we get in touch with you through the web?
Thanks, Richard. You can find me at my website, which is Soma Mandal, Mandal, md.com, and you will be able to find my book on Amazon and leading bookstores.
Wonderful. We're talking with, again, Dr. Soma Mandal here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and and there are times when I've done a few interviews such as this that are focusing primarily on women's issues, and I'm thinking, I need to have a female version of myself conducting this interview, because I have no business doing this. But by the same token, I wanted to dive back into not the symptoms, if you will, of menopause, and as we've already talked, but I'm curious as to how menopause shows itself if a woman, and this happens quite often, my present wife, had this happen to her back in 2001, where she had a rare form of fallopian tube cancer as it was diagnosed. They went in and they did a full hysterectomy. So now she doesn't have the reproductive organs. I'm curious as to how that plays into this scenario, because I can't remember whether she went through it or not, whether she went through menopause, because now she doesn't have. I mean, okay, go 12 months, 24, 48, whatever. Once the uterus is gone, once the full hysterectomy, you don't have that process. So, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So some women, if they've had certain surgeries where their ovaries are removed, and that would involve both sets of ovaries, they can go into an automatic menopause because they don't have the structures, the organs that produce estrogen in their body. So, for example, if a woman has ovarian cancer or she needs to have her ovaries removed because she's at high risk for certain other types of cancers,
Mhm.
um, that can induce an immediate menopause at whatever age she's having these type of surgeries.
I want to get back into women's health in general and maybe some other specifics, because I know that there are a lot of tests that need to be repeated over the life of a woman. One of them in particular, of course, is a breast exam, X-ray, if you will, of the breast tissue to hope that they don't have breast cancer. My eldest sister, unfortunately, had that, and that's what took her life. And she made it to 65. I have to say, what a courageous person she was. I was told following her passing, because my sisters and mother were closer to her than I was, because they're in Phoenix as she was, and I'm out here in California. And they said she never, and it wasn't just that, it was other things too. She's never complained, never complained. I thought, wow, you know, um, she had every right to complain. She had every justification. But talk to us about some of the other issues, maybe the top three or what have you, that women need to be regularly tested for, whether they're having any kinds of initial, shall we say, symptoms and so forth. That it's like with me and the prostate and the PSA, I'd rather get it checked early rather than wait and then, oh, you have prostate cancer and now we got to go through this process and blah, 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 blah.
So I'm a huge advocate of regular screenings for both men and women.
Mhm.
And for women, that involves, having a mammogram every year, having a pap smear every 2 to 3 years, maybe even, sooner, depending on their history, having regular colonoscopies, and that can vary in terms of the time interval based on family history and all sorts of other stuff. Um, in addition to that, I'll bring us back to the beginning of the conversation where
Mhm.
I had discussed that menopause puts at puts us at risk for certain things, and that one of those things is heart disease. And
Mm.
my book, does address that, where women don't realize that going through menopause and finishing menopause, completing it, we are then at after 5 years at the same risk of having a heart attack as a man. So
Mm.
that's when I get the stuff going. We have to check your cholesterol. We have to check and make sure we look for other markers for heart disease. Make sure you're not diabetic. Make sure you don't have high blood pressure. And if you do have all these things or a family history of heart disease or stroke, really get the process going so that we reduce your risk of having a heart attack or a stroke in the future.
Well, I would say, as you've very well stated, yeah, it's good to get checked. I even had a situation where I think it was at 55, almost 10 years ago, I had my first colonoscopy. They found a very tiny, benign little bump or polyp or whatever you want to call it. So I asked my doctor, I says, okay, you found that and it was there and it was benign and all of that good stuff. But don't you think maybe when I hit 60, maybe I should have another one? He said, oh no, you're fine. You go into another 10 years. And I question the logic behind not having a test at 60, because my next one's coming up next year. Because sometimes these things can grow really fast, you know, and we just don't know. And then by the time I get to 65 and I have my second colonoscopy in my lifetime, uh, my colon and intestines could be ravaged. You know, I don't want to put that out there, because I'm a firm believer that words do have power. So universe, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that a woman, for example, a breast exam, is that annual?
It
Typically
should
annual?
it could even be biannual where your gynecologist is checking your breasts. It could be your primary care physician, meaning
Mhm.
myself, or a family practitioner who's checking your breasts. So, and then women can also be doing their own self exams and checking their breasts as well.
Yeah, it's and I couldn't agree with you more. By the way, I want to dive into another area here, and it's part of your subtitle of the book. Well, actually, I guess it is part of the title. Dear Menopause, I do not fear you. Fear not only can debilitate you to taking action, but my understanding is from a biochemical standpoint, it can generate certain chemicals that can actually hinder your health and well-being. Talk to us about that as from your experience.
I think, what you're referring to is that whole flight or fight
Mhm.
kind of response. And that can be fear, it can be anxiety, it can be anger, where when we're chronically feeling these kind of emotions, and it can elevate certain hormones in our body, and that can also affect other hormones in our body. But typically, it raises our cortisol levels, and that can impact our insulin levels and all sorts of other stuff, and put us at risk for high blood pressure and diabetes, and impact our health in adverse ways. So, you know, obviously, working on staying calm and your mental health are really important for these reasons.
When we take a look at the external world, a lot of people are very concerned about environmental aspects of health and wellness. And every time I turn around, and just probably like you, and then we hear this story, and sometimes we don't hear the stories, but we'll hear the story of, oh, we had this major, you know chemical fire, and the winds are carrying the smoke and so forth. And then the authorities say, oh, this will have no impact on our public. We'll have you evacuate for a period of time and then we'll go home. Or we'll have a nuclear disaster, whether it's 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, what have you. Oh, it's not a problem, and so on and so forth. Even here in California, when we have wildfires and then the smoke, it sometimes the winds will carry it to the south if it's a northern fire, and the wind will carry it south, even to us here on the Central Coast and Southern California, or it sends it to the east, and other people are breathing this stuff. And it's not a problem, no big deal. And it's not long after that all of a sudden people start having issues, health issues. And of course, the authorities say, well, there's no, how are you going to prove that it wasn't, something else that you did, and so on and so forth. Uh, does that frustrate you at all in terms, not so much of authorities taking ownership for, yeah, this could very well be the cause of your issue and we're going to look into it, and so forth. I mean, I think about the first responders at 9/11 and how hard they fought to get compensation, if you will. Not that that's the reason why they went in there. I'll jump into the fray and help people so that I can get money. That's not why they did it. And yet they suffered, and yet they fought and had to try to somehow figure out how to prove that the environmental issues around them may very well have contributed to not only their declining health, but even death.
Yes, I think it's well known at this point, and I certainly have patients, who were, part of 9/11 and were exposed to a lot of the toxicities that resulted from that, and I see a whole host of illnesses that make no sense, based on their family history and everything else. So I remember, when 9/11 occurred, uh, a lot of people were saying, "Okay, well, this shouldn't, impact anyone." But I was like, "How can it not? The stuff is in the air, and all the stuff that people were inhaling. Of course, it's terribly bad for people's health. And and you mentioned the fires in California last year. We on the East Coast were exposed to the Canadian, the smoke from the Canadian fires,
Mhm.
and as an asthmatic, that definitely caused me to have breathing issues. So environment definitely has a huge role in our
Yeah.
impacts our health in many ways.
If an individual, male or female, and again, I know you deal primarily with women, so we can stay focused there. But let's say that a woman is she's growing up and she's aging and she, let's just say, goes through the normal process of menopause and doesn't really have any underlying conditions. The typical process of the human body, though, is that it is constantly changing. The chemistry is constantly changing, especially as we get older. And so that also affects not just our physical health, but our mental and emotional health. And I know that's a really big topic to get into, but I'm curious as to, because you mentioned too, food being, for example, our medicine. We can gauge how we feel after having consumed a certain thing. I, I know the number one item primarily on women's list, but some men like it too, and that's chocolate. And chocolate can be a real uplift, you know, and so forth. What have you found in your profession and in your experience? What have you found in the way of things that help your health and well-being? Uh, because and here's the reason I ask the question, because buying organic is huge now. Now I remember when it first came on the market, and I didn't trust it then, and I don't trust it now. And here's the reason: we had a strawberry grower here in California, Central Coast, got nailed and shut down because they were putting organic on their strawberries, and they were not organic. And I have been saying for decades, you can slap a label on anything and call it whatever you want. And until you're caught, that kind of thing. What do you use to make sure you're getting the medicine in the context of food that is actually going to help you, that's going to benefit you and your body and your personal internal pharmacy of sorts?
There are certain foods that I only buy organic. I can list them, but I don't necessarily think everything has to be organic, but should be properly washed and cooked uh, before they're consumed. Um, Food as medicine is very important because that old adage of "you are what you eat."
Mm-hmm.
Especially in this country where there's so many different fillers and additives and chemicals, and those can be labeled organic too. You look at, you go to Whole Foods and you pick up something, and I'm like, how can this be organic? There's like so many different, preservatives that
Mm.
are listed. So just because it's organic doesn't mean it's healthy. Uh, the simple rule of, if you're eating something that grew from the earth directly and not processed,
Mm-hmm.
that's the way to go. And eat, as little meat as possible. Focus on your fruits and vegetables, focus on being happy, focus on getting some type of movement on a regular basis, and get good sleep.
You make a very good point there. I'm curious as to using one's intuition or gut feeling to make purchases if you're going to buy, let's say, in a traditional grocery store, because I would like to think that the farmers markets, which we have them here, we have 6 of them on the Central Coast. And when you go there, you're looking at the stuff that was just pulled out of the ground. And there is a certification process within the farmers market organization, Santa Barbara Certified Farmers Markets, where if you're going to label it organic, which they prefer to have, there is a certification process and so forth. So you can pretty much trust that, hey, this is going to be good for me. This is going to be beneficial. But what about that? Shall we say, as I mentioned earlier, about the decade of perfect vision and going within and listening to that still small voice? What about that in terms of the foods that you buy and ingest?
I think, just reinforce again, if you're buying stuff that's coming from the earth, and you're eating it properly and enough of it, and not consuming other things or adding other things that are processed, then that's the best way to maintain your overall health, as well as your gut health.
Hmm. You think that the rule that I remember hearing as a kid growing up, when you go to the grocery store, always purchase from the outer areas of the store. Do not purchase from the middle of the store, because that's where all the processed stuff is.
Right.
Because your produce is at one end of the store, your meats and
Right.
poultry and fish are on the back of the store, and usually your dairy and what have you are on the other end of the store, opposite of the produce.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We,
So
as America,
go ahead.
we eat too much processed food in America.
Hmm. There's and of course, who was I cannot remember the guy's name, who, what was it, for 30 days he ate nothing but McDonald's morning,
Yeah.
noon, and night. And I don't know how many pounds he put on, but I believe he just recently passed away.
Yeah, he passed away. I'm not sure of what happened to him. But yeah, the whole
Yeah.
thing. I remember that whole thing too.
Yeah. It was very, very, very interesting and very provocative, but thought provoking as well, because you start to question, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I'll skip that burger from that place today, and so forth and so on. Um, we're talking with Dr. Soma Mandal. Dear Menopause, I do not fear you. It's a modern woman's guide to thriving through life, through midlife, I should say. And if I may ask, and again, barring any violations of the HIPAA law, how is your health these days? I mean, you did mention you still have asthma. Is that correct?
I do, but it's thankfully under good control with not just modern medicine, but I make sure I do all the things that keep the asthma as well controlled as possible.
And your health is good regardless. So you basically you take your own advice.
I try to. I
Hmm.
try to. I won't say that I've always, uh, practiced what I preach, but as I get older, I'm seeing that it's really important to, get movement, to keep your weight under control, to get as good sleep as possible, to try and stay as happy as possible. And that doesn't mean happy every day, but to work on overall being as content as you can in life. These are the most important things that we can do to stay healthy.
And I've heard it said that some of the the happiest people that we have, who are happy all day, every day, they're in institutions in padded rooms. I don't want to take that away from them, but by the same token, it's like, okay, we go through cycles, even emotionally. I'm curious about the other influence, not just the intuition, but what about our personal philosophical life? I can put the other word on it too, the spiritual life, not necessarily religion. How important do you think that that having faith in something outside of oneself, although I believe it's inside us too, but anyway, for sake of argument, how important do you think that also is in maintaining good health overall?
I'm not particularly religious. I don't classify myself as being part of any particular religion, but I do believe that being spiritual,
Mhm.
and staying connected to certain beliefs, keep us connected. And for some people, that involves religion. That can give them motivation. It can give them faith. It can give them an outlet. So, uh, for some of my patients who are religious and are going through certain issues, as a doctor, I often say, have you, relied on your faith as a way of helping you through your difficult time, even though I don't necessarily subscribe to any particular religion.
Mhm. How about laughter? Now, obviously, for those who remember the Reader's Digest, and it's one section, laughter is the best medicine. It brings to mind, I believe, it was, I think it was Norman Vincent Peale. He was diagnosed with a particular terminal thing. They gave him 6 weeks, something along those lines. He basically said no and just started watching all kinds of on television, all kinds of things like the Three Stooges and anything that would make him laugh. And I know he went on to live a rather long life beyond the 6 weeks that they originally gave him. How important? I mean, you talked about being happy, but beyond that happiness, the laughter. How important do you think that is?
I think it's important to laugh, not just, to stay happy, but to also laugh at ourselves, to not take ourselves so seriously, because when you realize how little we are in the spectrum of not just life, but the part of the universe, right? Um, Laughter kind of keeps us humble. It also keeps us connected to others because, when they see that you are laughing, right? It's a way of kind of connecting with you. Um, so, I'll share with you, I laugh a lot, sometimes to to relieve stress, sometimes, when there's something really funny with my kids, or my spouse, but it's a way we all stay connected together.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more about laughing at ourselves. In other words, not taking ourselves that too seriously. I mean, certainly there are some serious aspects to our lives, but I have a dear friend who passed away last year. I knew him for 53 of what is now 64 years of my life. We went through grade school, high school, and college together. And every time I think about him, in spite of the fact that my mind goes, oh, you really need to cry. You need to cry over his passing, the loss. You can't call him now and talk to him like you used to. Every time I think about him, I can't do anything but laugh because we used to have so much fun together. We used to we just had a blast together. And and I'm grateful. Maybe one day I will. One day I will. But I couldn't agree with you more in that regard. And it certainly makes a big difference, especially in releasing tension, not only within ourselves, but in a situation like, laughter within a group of people where there's this tension. It'd be nice to just kind of lighten things up a little bit and not take everything quite so seriously. Even our health, even if we're going through stuff, like I was told about my sister, who according to them, she never complained, you know, and she had a great laugh. And when she laughed, You saw both rows of her teeth. That's how big her laugh was, you know. Oh my heavens, I can hear it now. Oh, by the way, speaking of asthma, she had asthma as a child growing up. Guess what instrument she played in school, in the band, in the marching band? The
The
French
trumpet.
horn.
Okay.
And I go, who does that? You have trouble breathing and you're playing a wind, you're playing a brass, I'll call it a brass wind instrument. Really? But she was really good, really, really good. Second chair in the Scottsdale Symphony Orchestra. A few years before her passing. I just am astounded by her ability to overcome, if you will, or go through all of that. Do you find that many of your patients, women in particular, they might say to you, I can't do this. No, 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 I'm not strong enough. And in reality, when they get down the road a little ways and their health is improving, they begin to realize, oh my gosh, I'm stronger than I thought.
Women in general tend to be pretty strong. I don't think I can't think of a single woman patient that has said to me, I cannot do this. They can often feel scared and, frightened, but I don't recall anybody saying, I'm not able to do this. Somehow they, find the reserve within themselves to be able to, pull themselves through. And the other thing about women in general is that they're much more forward with their health. Um, they have a good intuition. They know when something may not be right. The trouble happens when they're not necessarily heard about what they're going through.
Mm.
And that's a whole separate issue. But um, they often have a very good intuition and they know that something's not right. So I often find that they are big advocates for themselves.
Now, I would venture that the majority of your patients would say yes. Dr. Mandala, she hears me, she sees me, whereas whether it's a male or female doctor, there are a lot who probably say, no, I don't feel like I've been heard. What's your recommendation if someone is in that kind of a situation, male or female for that matter?
Yeah, yeah.
How do
I
you get heard?
yeah. So I even though I'm a doctor, I've been in those situations where I have felt that I have not been heard, maybe because they did not necessarily know that I was a physician. Uh, and I didn't feel heard about, what was happening with my health. And I knew exactly what was going on. And I knew there was something not right. And I either made myself heard or I found someone else to hear me.
Mm.
So, that's what I tell my patients, like, just because this, particular situation didn't work out where you didn't feel heard, it doesn't necessarily mean you should give up. Just go on to, find someone else who will.
Well, that's very important. Well, I can tell you right now, you have been heard here on the program with what you've been sharing with us here on the on Tell Me Your Story, and I encourage people to seek out. That's the other thing too. I think it's you've got also have to be comfortable with. In this case, we'll talk about it from this standpoint. Your primary care physician, okay, or your oncologist, or your gynecologist, or urologist, or whatever other ologist you choose. My ophthalmologist, for example, is a female, and I prefer. I'll be honest with you, I actually prefer female physicians, even in specialties, because they're usually a little bit more understanding. They're going to be more nurturing, if you will, which is it's that's kind of part of a woman's makeup, is to be nurturing. It's not to say that, for example, in my primary care physician, who's a male, got a great bedside manner, does not pull any punches, but also doesn't try to scare the bejesus out of me either, well, and I noticed that your blood pressure's up today, and your blood sugar, well, yeah, congratulations, that's down. And so he's both uh, observing the test results, and saying, well, we have a little concern here, and congratulations on bringing this level down, because that makes a big difference, because you're not going to have to be dealing with, as long as you keep it down, other ancillary issues that'll come up, like with, for example, type 2 diabetes, which I've kept under control now for maybe 7 or 8 months. Um, uh, I don't have to worry, as long as I keep it under control, with issues with my kidneys or my heart and so on and so forth. Keeping the blood pressure down, same thing. So I'm looking at it not so much of, I need to get the blood pressure down, I need to get the blood sugar down. It's, I don't want to have to deal with issues with my kidneys or my heart or my liver, or the things of that nature. So I applaud you in what you're doing to try to educate women, but also men. Are you finding that, I know that you deal primarily with women, but do you ever see male patients?
Oh, I see male patients every day. So I have plenty of men patients. I just have
Mhm.
a focus
Right.
on women's health, but a lot of my male patients are actually, related to my women patients. And then I have plenty of patients who just come in, male patients
Mhm.
who are just standalones of the, in and of themselves. So, um, yes, I have a lot of male patients that I see every day, and so I am knowledgeable about men's health as well.
Do you have a particular, and again, I know you said that you consider yourself more spiritual, not religious per se. Do you have a particular, I'll put it in two different contexts, philosophy or mission statement that not just Dr. Soma Mandal, but Soma Mandal lives by?
I think kindness is a big, factor, and humility, and that's something that I try to remind myself about, to stay humble, to remain kind, to be kind, even in moments when I don't want to be kind. And as a parent, it's important for me to model these characteristics, for my children. So we try to, as parents, we try to, try to have them stay as humble as possible, and to be kind to others, and to help others as much as possible. And that's one of the things that, I feel like, that's why I went into medicine, and I always tell my children, doesn't matter what you go into. You don't have to be a physician. You don't have to, whatever it is that, you want to do.
Mhm.
Stay kind, stay humble, and help others.
Well, I tell you what, I wish we could pass that message on to a lot of different people who they'd go a heck of a lot further if they would just find the humility to recognize that, first of all, they didn't do it all by themselves. They had a lot of help. I am beholden to thousands of people who have helped me along the way to where I am here right now with you talking. I didn't do this all by myself, although I did have to do the work, but
Yes.
I'm grateful to those people. I think about one woman in particular, going back to the 80s, who suggested I go to Toastmasters. And first of all, that was a great experience. And I remember the woman's name too, Margaret Pickerick. I know she's since passed on, because she was rather elderly when she gave me that advice, some 40 years ago. Um, and so I'm grateful to all of those people, past and present, who are part of my life, and it's including yourself, for being a part of this program. I want to thank you for being a part of Tell Me Your Story, sharing your story, and talking to us about the book you have now called Dear Menopause, I Do Not Fear You, a modern woman's guide to thriving through midlife. I really do appreciate the time that you've given us here on the program, and the kindness that you talk about, that you share with the people around you, within your practice, and elsewhere as well. And so thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm honored to be on your show.
I have three final questions that I ask all of my
Okay.
guests at the wrap up of the program. But before I ask those questions of you, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Once again, we're here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m. for our special edition of Tell Me Your Story, as well as 8 to 9 a.m. Monday through Friday, streaming live at those times at richarddugan.com. We also podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these interviews. I hope you'll subscribe. And I hope that in addition to subscribing, you will click on the notification button so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be able to tune in and listen in. And if you go to YouTube, watch the conversation unfold. And let's see, what else have we got for you? If you'd like to support the work that we are doing financially, we have a PayPal account that's there for your security as well as ours. And email address that you're going to want to post to whom you're sending, richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address, richard@richarddugan.com. And also, as we've said many, many times, almost every single program since, September of 2019, to take part in what we're promoting as the decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, asking you to go within and listen to that still small voice, follow the promptings in that quiet, peaceful, calm space that, as I've said before, no one else can get to but you. That's a personal, private. You talk about HEPA laws there. Nobody can even tap into it. They can't bug it or anything. It's yours. Okay. So, with all that being said, we turn back to our guests, and I want to thank you once again. First question that I ask of my guests is, in your case, who is Soma Mandal?
I'm a wife, a mother, a good person, a funny person, and in addition to that, a doctor who truly cares about her patients.
I have to say on a sidebar, I am pleased that you said that you are a good person. Not many people say that. They can because they are, but sometimes they don't believe it. So that's wonderful. What gets you up in the morning?
That first cup of coffee is what really motivates me. And I like the morning just because it's a time when you can really kind of structure, how your day is going to go. Even if it doesn't go that way, you can meditate and be like, okay, this is how I'm going to be for the rest of the day. So that's my favorite time of the day.
Finally, what was your best day?
My best day was I've had several, so I'm blessed. The birth of my daughter, the day I married my husband,
Hmm.
day I became a doctor, all sorts of stuff. I mean, I can list many, many best days.
Well, once again, we thank you so much for being a part of the work we're doing here, trying to change the world for the better for all. And you're doing your part where you are in your part of the world. And we thank you for that. And again, thank you for being a part of Tell Me Your Story.
Thank you.
And folks, thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.